moving into our 7th lesson for Genesis, and appreciate everybody being so dedicated to becoming Sunday school and missing those that's not here today. So just remember them, reach out to them, and welcome everybody joining us on the online and watching from home. Those that wanted to be here and couldn't be, we're glad to have you also. Mark, will be able to relate to what I'm about to talk about, and probably everybody, if you ever worked on your house before, you'll be able to relate to this. The business that my family's in, we build custom doors and door entries and some windows and things like that. Most of it's going into new construction, new houses. But every now and then we'll have something that is going into an older house somebody's trying to remodel or they're adding on a section. But sometimes there'll be a particular project that somebody is taking an old house and they're restoring it. And what they'll do is the builder will go in and strip out everything that's rotten, everything that's decayed, everything that's corroded, everything that's broken, cracked, withered away, and get down to the core of that home that's solid. And then they'll build it back. And so they'll call it a restoration because of that. And that's what our lesson is going to be on today. It's called restoration, because God, in last week's lesson, talked about it. We discussed how God placed judgment on the earth with Noah and the flood. And this week's lesson is kind of rare because we usually don't go after the same story 2 weeks in a row. But we're going to be working on Noah and the flood again, but the back half of the story. And I did kind of hit it at the very end of the lesson last week. But this week's lesson is focused solely on the restoration that came after the destruction of the earth. Not the earth itself, but all the living things upon the earth. And so last week was on judgment in chapter 6 and 7. This week is on chapter 8 mostly. We'll hit chapter 9 slightly. But discussing the restoration of earth, the restoration of life, the restoration of everything that had been taken away. And so we remember in last week's lesson in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 6, and it said that Noah had found favor with God and that Noah walked with God. And so the entire event of the flood lasted more than a year as Noah was in that ark. He was told to go in, God shut the door, and the rain started. And then it lasted 40 days, and then there was this 150 days of time of drying out. And then Noah had to wait longer, if you remember we read all that, and we're going to hit it again. But all that time, if you think about it, I hope since last week's lesson, it's crossed your mind, a year. I mean, a year spent inside of a boat. I mean, I rode a boat around for half hour. I've had enough a lot of time. But a year inside this boat with a bunch of smelly animals. I mean, you got to look after them while they're in there, keep them from fighting with one another. They're animals. And being trapped inside that environment for a year is a long time. What'd you say? That's right. Without hearing one word from God. There's no mention of conversation from God during this year. And he's in there this whole time, and all these living and creatures and humans that were outside the ark were wiped out. And so now, after that time has passed, God's ready to start over with Noah. He's got Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. So there's 8 people that God chose to save in this picture. And so we're going to look at 4 phrases that I picked out that hit me. I think they stand out when you go, and there's all kinds of poetic structures in the Old Testament. And for this has one, and I can't remember the name of it, but for me, these are the 4 that popped out. And so I kind of built the lesson around these 4 phrases. And I'll give you the verses as I go. Chapter 8 and verse 1, they're very short. God remembered Noah. Chapter 8 and verse 15, God spoke to Noah. Chapter 8 and verse 20, Noah built an altar to the Lord. And then chapter 9 and verse 1, God blessed Noah. That's the restoration in a nutshell. It's also the picture of a human being coming to God. God remembers us. God speaks to us. We build an altar. We give back to God and respond, and then God blesses us. And throughout the Old Testament, we see that picture. God says to Moses, tell the people, if you obey me, I'll bless you. If you don't obey me, I'll be forced to curse you. And that just goes throughout the Bible, and it carries through to our relationship with Jesus Christ. So we're going to start by reading a lot of chapter 8. We'll read verses 1 through 14, and then work our way through this lesson of restoration. So God remembered Noah, as well as all the wildlife and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. God caused the wind to pass over the earth, and the water began to subside. And the sources of the watery depths and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky stopped. The water steadily receded from the earth, and by the end of 150 days, the water had decreased significantly. 5 months. 5 months. Okay, the ark came to rest in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. So you can go look up Mount Ararat and see that, get some background on where Mount Ararat is. The water continued to recede until the 10th month, so now we're out 10 months. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were visible. So after 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. Now, when I read this, it crossed my mind for the first time, they were in the dark. Have you ever thought about that? Like in my mind all these years, I've been thinking, well, there's a window up there. They can see some light at least. No. Everything was closed. When you're at nighttime, it's all darkness. There is no light. There's no lanterns to speak of. There's nothing. They were in the dark this whole time. Whatever light, little cracks, I'm sure, you know, wood building as it was, they had pitch on the boat. Maybe in the top there was some cracks and little seams of light popping through. But you can see. He's in the dark. So back to our text. After 40 days, I'm at verse 6. After 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent out a raven. It went back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see whether the water on the earth's surface had gone down. But the dove found no resting place for its foot. It returned to him in the ark because the water covered the surface of the whole earth. He reached out and brought it into the ark to himself. So Noah waited 7 more days, and he sent out the dove from the ark again. When the dove came to him at evening, there was a plucked olive in its beak. So Noah knew that the water on the earth's surface had gone down. And after he had waited another 7 days, he sent out the dove again, but it did not return. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st day of the month, the water that had covered the earth was dried up. Now, that's the 600th year of Noah's life, I'm assuming. And so it looks to me as if, you remember when he turned 600? It said Noah entered into the ark and the flood started and Methuselah had died. That whole conversation we had last week. Here it goes on the 601st year, the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the water was dried up. So dead on the 1st day. Okay? Noah removed the ark's cover and saw that the ground was drying. By the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was dry. So he stayed in there even longer. But I imagine when he took the top off and he could see the dry land, it was enough hope to, all right, we're almost there. At least they could see the end of the tunnel here. All right, so verses 1 through 15, God remembered Noah. God just didn't remember Noah like he forgot about him. This is talking about how God remembered Noah was faithful. He remembered that what Noah had done before this flood. And we mentioned a few minutes ago how Noah found favor with God and that Noah walked with God. And so here it's God remembered Noah was a faithful man. And he also remembered the animals. Read in verse 1. As well as all the wildlife and the livestock that were with him in the ark. God had this plan. You go in the boat, you take all those animals in the boat. And that was his covenant with Noah. I won't forget about you. Just go there. Just obey what I'm asking you to do. So the earth dries up as we read. There's 7 months the ark rests. 2.5 more months he sees the mountains. 40 days he sends out a raven. Why a raven? I was reading on a raven. And a raven can fly and fly and fly and fly. And they can go a long, long time without perching. They can just go for miles and days without even stopping. I didn't know they could had that kind of endurance, but they can go a long time. So after that, he sends a dove. 7 days, dove again, 7 more days, the dove again, and he doesn't come back. Then 50 plus days later, we got dry land. So all that time, and we talked about last week just briefly, how he had to be patient. But he wasn't just patient as in patient, I'm ready for this to be over. It was a patience with some faith built into it. This whole thing was built on faith. And when we look at how people had to have faith in the Bible, in the commentary we listened to earlier, it mentioned Abraham and David and the children of Israel and Jesus himself. They all had to have a faith that went along with patience. Remember, Abraham had to wait 100 years before he had a baby, Isaac. David had to wait a whole bunch of years before he could be the king. The children of Israel walked around in the wilderness for 40 years before they could go in the promised land. Jesus was tempted 40 days. So this waiting is part of the building up of our faith, having to go through things and wait and be patient. So God was preparing the earth for Noah and the animals. He was destroying what was corrupt and evil, but at the same time, he was preparing the earth for what was to come after this flood was over. And there was 2 parts of this preparation. One was eliminating all the rot. Remember our example we began with the building. You can't restore a house until you take away all the bad. You got to get rid of all the bad and decay and corrupt before you can start on the other. But while he's doing that, he's also building up and preparing for what's to come afterwards, and that's Noah inside this ark. All right, so number 2. Point number 2 we mentioned, God spoke to Noah. Go to verse 15. Let's read 15 through 19. Then God spoke to Noah and said, "Come out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds, livestock, those that crawl on the earth, and they will spread over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah, along with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, came out, and all the animals and all the creatures that crawl and all the flying creatures, everything that moves on the earth, came out of the ark by their families. All right, so in verse 1 of chapter 7, God had told Noah, "Enter the ark, you and your household." And here in verse 15 of chapter 8, he says, "Come out of the ark." He's given his specific instruction to come out. This is a picture of Noah and his family. And I'm kind of jumping ahead in lesson slightly just because I want to bring it to our attention to be thinking about the rest of the way. This is a picture of Noah and his family completing a baptism. And so I want to think about your Christian walk as you come to Christ and then you are baptized. And when we go down in the water, we are washing away every corrupt thing about us and wicked and evil thing about us spiritually. We're still dirty. We're still sinful now. That doesn't go away. But we're washing away that old way of life. And when we come out, like he was told to come out of the ark. When we come out of the water, we're a new creature. It's a symbol, it's a metaphor of, and a picture of us becoming a new thing that's clean and new and ready for the next thing God has for us. So this coming out of the ark in verse 15 is a picture of them completing a baptism. Let's go to 1 Peter. You don't have to turn, I'll read it, but if you want to, you can. 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're going to read 19 through 21. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, 19 through 21. "In which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient, when God patiently waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared. In it a few, that is 8 people, were saved through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a good conscience toward God, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." So there's a picture of that Peter talks about, of Noah and his family being baptized, and it's similar to us being baptized as well. So Noah and his family had been through a life-changing experience. It was a test of his endurance and faith. This wasn't just hard on the people outside the boat. They lost their lives. But it was incredibly hard on the people inside the boat. Like we mentioned, they're in darkness, and they're in there for a year. We went to Haley and Ryan's last night and watched this movie, part of it anyway. I couldn't watch it so much. And it's based on a plane crash in 1972, I think it was. And it was in the Chilean mountains, or the Andes Mountains. And it was a rugby team from Uruguay, I think. They crashed, it's a true story. They crashed in the mountains, and more than half the people died during the crash. But the main hull of that plane made it. And so the people that were in the front half of that plane, they survived. And they had to live in that little piece of fuselage for 72 days and try to survive until they finally were rescued. And we were talking about who was worse off, the ones that passed away in the crash, or the ones that had to live in that and endure that temperature and try to survive for 2.5 months. And some of it, we were just sitting there kind of like, I think it might have been better off to just die in the crash. That's torture, and the movie is about the long, enduring day and night, because they were, 40, 50 mile an hour blizzard winds at nighttime, and they would pack all their suitcases into any opening they could find. They shut off the cold air. And I got thinking about how that relates to this. Noah's life for a year was, I'm trapped in this boat. When is this going to be over? But God spoke to Noah and said, now it's time to come out. He's been through this long piece of endurance, this long time. He's given this plan now to come out. And he gives him the news he's been looking for. Let me out of this boat. I'm glad this is over. And he gives him good news. He says, you come out. You bring all the creatures that's with you. They come out. Don't you know these animals are ready to bust out of there too? And I noticed something that maybe you didn't catch or maybe you hadn't caught before. Go down to verse 19 at the end of it. Everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark by their families. They went in 2 by 2. They went in male and female. We got 2 crocodiles. Now we got baby crocodiles. We went in, giraffes, and now we got family of giraffes. They came out in more than 2s, families of animals coming out. And then God tells them and said they're going to spread over the earth. They're going to be fruitful. They're going to multiply. They all came out, and it's just like a celebration of them coming outside this ark. And they all are they're ready for this time of restoration. God is beginning this restoration. This time of suffering endurance is over. Thank goodness. And so we can come out of this thing. He didn't have to be told twice, I'm sure. He said, come out. He said, we're coming. We're getting out of this thing. Over a year they spent in the ark, and now they're ready to exit. It also crossed my mind, I wonder if he walked off that boat and before he left it, looked back at it and goes, this thing has kept me and my family safe through this whole ordeal. And it was kind of sad because he had built this thing. And I wonder if it was kind of sad to him to walk off and look back at it. And I think he just walked off. If it was me, I believe I would walk off thinking, just thank you, God, for helping this thing stay together. Because I built it with human hands, So he comes off. And now, what's the first thing that happens? Point number 3, we started at the beginning. Noah builds an altar. Go to verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took some of every kind of clean animal and every kind of clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of human beings, even though the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth onward. And I will never again strike down every living thing as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. And the bulk of our lesson today is going to come out of this section. The first thing Noah did when he walked off that ark, it says that he built an altar. And I just mentioned how, I think he was extremely relieved, unbelievably appreciative and full of gratitude to God that he had made it through this ordeal. And so he comes out and he recognizes where his safety lies through this whole thing, and he builds an altar. The first thing he does is build this altar to worship through the sacrifice. We got clean animals and unclean animals, and without going to a long discussion, the clean animals were the ones that he kept more of. He took 7 of those for this specific thing. When I'm done with this, we come off this boat, I'm going to sacrifice some of these animals to God as an offering. So he took some of the clean ones. This is what caught my eye, and it's not funny, but at the same time, it made me smile a little bit, because he says he took some of every kind of clean animal and every kind of clean bird and offered burnt offerings, as if he come out and goes, God, you've been so good. I'm offering everything we got, just to make sure you understand how much we appreciate this. We got every one of you. We're going to do it. If we got 2,000 offerings, we have 2,000 offerings. If I can do 2,001, I'll do that. It's just you can tell when his heart here that he has given everything he has back to God in gratitude. So the Lord smells this pleasing aroma. Reading verse 21. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said to himself, I'll never again curse the ground. So I want to spend some time on that one sentence, the pleasing aroma. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and that phrase is all over the Old Testament. It's over 30-something times just in Leviticus, because that's where the law was given to offer sacrifices to God. But this is not as much about the smell, okay, because God is spirit. He's not a human body. He's a spirit. So I don't know if he has a nose or not, but since he created smell, I'm assuming he knows how to smell. But that's not what this, it's not about the literal smell. Like when somebody's cooking bacon, I can smell bacon. Or when somebody's baking a cake, I can smell the cake. This is about the pleasing heart of the person that's given the sacrifice. And we immediately think back to Cain and Abel. We talked about that just a few weeks ago, how those two came and brought their offerings. And that Abel came with the first of what he had, and it was a heart of gratitude, full gratitude. And that offering was accepted. But Cain just kind of threw his at him. And it wasn't a heart of gratitude. It was just a heart of, hey, I got an obligation. Just knock this out. Make sure God knows I did it. Check the box and be done. And so this wasn't about the smell, but the heart. And Noah's heart was in praise and devotion to God. He had a relationship with God. That whole 100 and something, or a year he spent in that ark, I bet you every day, morning and night, he's calling out and praying to God. And like Mark's mentioned me, there was no word back, but he had no choice. Have faith in God. There's over in New Testament when Jesus asked the disciples, and a bunch of people had left them, and he said, y'all going to leave too? And Peter says, where else we going to go? You're the one we believe in. You're the one. We don't have anywhere else to go. But here, Noah knew, this is the one. This is my God. He's the only God I know. He had a relationship with God, and this was an offering of atonement to God. Why? Why offering of atonement? Well, God had cleansed the earth. God had ridded the world of evil, corrupt people and wickedness, trying to get it back to a place of solid, moral, stable, ethical people. Because there were so many of the world that had turned away from him. So God had baptized the earth in a way to wipe out corrupt man. But did that get rid of sin? No. Because from the minute Adam and Eve had sinned and sin came upon the earth, it was here. And it could not be done away with. Now I go back to my example from the beginning with the house. You can rip away all those decayed pieces you think you got. Somewhere in there, there's one more thing that's flawed. Somewhere. No matter what, it's still an old house. It's still sitting on an old foundation. It's still got weakness somewhere that you can't see. And that's how sin is in our lives. It's here to stay because we're born with it. And that's here forever. So sin was still here even though God had cleansed or baptized. The curse of sin could not be cured without one thing. That was Jesus, the promised one to come. Noah's in that line. So atonement was necessary. That's why this offering. Verse 21. Look at that again. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of human beings, even though the inclination of human heart is evil from youth onward. And I will never again strike down every living thing as I have done. So God's well pleased with Noah's heart. And he also knows that man will be sinful. So he declares that all creation will no longer pay for man's sinful nature. In other words, I'm not making a cat pay because of man's sin. I'm not going to make a monkey pay because man sins. It's man's fault that we're in this place. It's man's. Listen, the animals didn't disobey. They live by instinct. And so God says, I'm no longer going to make the earth and creation pay because of man. Read what he says about man. I'll never again curse the ground because of human beings, even though the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. So we're inclined from our youth, from our time as a baby. I mean, when you watch babies, they say no. They're rebelling. That's because they have sinful nature. Man's evil from our youth. There's a life of sin that's just hanging on our human heart. And so those who seek to reconcile to God, they show a heart and an attitude that's pleasing to God. That's that aroma that's pleasing to God. All the sacrifices in the Old Testament were done with a true heart of devotion to God and with desire to reconcile to God, had the aroma that was pleasing to God. And it says those words. This one would offer a sacrifice, and the aroma was pleasing to God. So let's read some of those. I'm just read a couple of things. Leviticus 3 and 5. This is Moses, in the time of Moses here, and his brother Aaron. Aaron's sons will burn it on the altar along with the burnt offering that is on the burning wood, a fire offering that of a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And you can read through Leviticus and you just spot that same phrase over and over. An offering that was pleasing to the Lord. Okay, so the atonement was pleasing. The payment was pleasing. The attitude was pleasing. Isaiah 1:11. We got a different side here. Because you remember in the time of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and this is when the people had turned away from God. And there's a different take on this. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 11, what are all your sacrifices to me? Asked the Lord. I've had enough of your burnt offerings and rams, and the fat of the well-fed cattle. I have no desire for the blood of bulls, lambs, or male or goats. When you come to appear before me, who requires this from you, this trampling of my court? Stop bringing these useless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. Go down to verse 16. Wash yourselves, cleanse yourselves, remove your evil deeds from my sight. Stop doing evil, learn to do what is good. And here God's saying, look, I don't want your offering. I don't want your burnt offering because the aroma is not pleasing to me. And it's not because you're not going through the act. It's because of your attitude. Because the people were not following God in that time. And he has a different take on this aroma because it says the incense is detestable. Because it wasn't the smell that he wanted to smell. It's a different type of aroma now because their attitude was sinful and corrupt, not full of dedication and reconciliation to God. Okay, the sacrifice being burned, yep, but the attitude was wrong. The heart of man was not there, and we have to have restoration with God. So when Noah came out of the ark, he was a new man. He was not the same. It's been a year plus of having faith in God, and his heart was in devotion to God. And he was set on restoring whatever God wanted to restore. His offering wasn't just animals, it was also himself. When Noah built this altar and he had this sacrifice, he was also sacrificing himself, giving himself. Romans 12 and verse 1. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Remember that phrase? This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. And so Noah, as I mentioned, while all that destruction was going on outside that boat, inside that boat, Noah was being changed. And he was becoming a new person too. And he was learning to give of himself So we're not a dead sacrifice, we're a living sacrifice. And we're baptized and we're renewed and we're restored to a relationship with God. We're going all over here. Ephesians 5. I got it marked. Where is it? There. Ephesians 5, 1 and 2. Ephesians 5, I like Ephesians anyway. Ephesians 5 and 1 and 2. Therefore be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk in love, as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, a sacrificial and fragrant offering to God. So Jesus himself carries out this same attitude, a sacrifice to God. And it says it was pleasing and fragrant to God. So now, after reading all these things about atonement and sacrifice, what do we see comes next? Last point for today is chapter 9 and verse 1. God bless Noah. The attitude that Noah had, the sacrifice to God, not just of some animals, but of his heart, resulted in this phrase, God blessed Noah. After everything he'd been through and his commitment to God, his devotion to God, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And if you go back to Genesis 1 and then 28, and we're talking about Adam and Eve, what's the thing he tells them? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. He blessed, and he says he blessed them. So God wants to bless us. He wants to bless us and give us good things. He just wants us to commit our lives and give ourselves to him. All right, chapter 9 and verse 3. Every creature that lives and moves will be food for you. As I gave the green plants, I have given everything to you. I have given you everything. So, and then after that, verses 8, 11, and 12. This is my covenant with you. I'm establishing a covenant with you. This is the sign of the covenant I'm making with you. So, after this has steps, and after Noah had built this altar of sacrifice to God, God blesses Noah by coming back and saying, I'm going to give you everything. That's why when we hear, if you just give something to God, he'll give you more than that back. This is a picture of that. Noah just gave of himself and a couple of offerings here. And all of a sudden, God's ready to give him everything he's got. And Noah is given the responsibility, him and his family, to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And so there's a promise that's given to Noah here. So his faith and his devotion resulted in God's blessing. Think about those same guys we talked about earlier, Moses, Abraham, David. They were just one person at the time. But Moses was faithful and committed to God, and he went through some hard things. But God blessed him. Abraham the same thing, and David the same thing. They all went through these times of uncertainty, and they had to just keep their faith in God. But Noah, just like Noah, who was in his ark, he was safe. And it's similar to our lives, because sometimes we're in a spot where we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's outside. But if we get inside the ark, which is our salvation, even though it's dark, even though we hear the crashing and the booms outside, and even though we don't know how long this is going to last, well, at least we know we're safe. The other night when we had those storms come through, you heard on the news over and over and over and over. Of course, they stand out there in it and then tell you to get inside. But they said, if you can get in a safe place, and they mean your house, they mean get in a solid building, they mean get in a place where you won't be hurt or injured by what's going on outside. And if home is home to you. So when something like that's going on, you want to be in your house with the doors locked and the windows shut, and in a spot where you know you're secure. And that's what it's like with us sometimes. We're not sure what's going on. We're not sure what's coming. But we know if we're safe inside, then we're okay. So the ark is God's protection. And so today, salvation is the ark for us. Salvation is the ark, and Jesus is the door. Remember we mentioned last week, there was one way into this thing, and Jesus was the way. So now, for us today, after Jesus has come and paid the sacrificial offering, he's now the door for us to get into the ark, which is salvation. So the earth wasn't the only thing that was restored that day or that year. Noah was restored too. His family, And his faith led him to a place of peace and rest. When this was all over, he had peace and rest. Now this is interesting. You know, you all heard the word shalom. In Hebrew, that means peace. Well, in Hebrew, Noah means rest. That's what his name means, rest. So after this whole ordeal is over, the restoration is beginning, and Noah can finally have peace and rest because of his faith in God. Okay, a lot more we could talk about. Now I mentioned that didn't end the sin, and it's not long after this, sin creeps up again, and it would carry on. But it took this ordeal and for Noah to be committed through this time for the line to go to Christ to continue. So, questions or comments? Anybody? Yeah. Yeah, somebody said one time that's how come there's so many fish in the ocean they didn't get wiped out. But I think they probably did now. There's enough storm to that place, it killed them. That is, yeah, something to think about too. Let's have a prayer then. Mr. Dale, would you pray? Good.